Hey everyone, welcome to Simulation. We are now sitting down with Zeke Kossover. Hello.
Hi, nice to talk with you.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Zeke and I first met when we were doing Thinkers and Drinkers, a fun show. We were doing that like 4 months ago now. It was a good show.
I'm marginally more sober now.
Zeke was crushing it. You were answering the questions. We had really tough and diverse questions across different categories, and you were answering them, and you had good things to say and teach about it.
Well, so I'm a big fan of pub quiz, so I appreciate the pub quiz-oriented science questions. But one of the things about being I was a high school science teacher for 21 years, and you have to end up teaching essentially every science discipline. So if you're going to ask questions of like things you were supposed to learn in school as a science student, like that's the stuff I'm supposed to know.
Yeah, well, how does a rainbow work? And like, why don't oil and water mix? And like all this kind of stuff. And Zeke would be like, I have the answer. Yeah.
I can be particularly a know-it-all if you give me half a chance.
So Zeke, for the background, he is the co-director and teacher of the leadership program at the Teacher Institute at the Exploratorium. You've been doing that for 4 years now?
Yes.
Awesome. And then also before that, 10 years as the Dean of Math and Science at the Jewish Community High School of the Bay.
Yes.
And then also an Einstein Distinguished Fellow, Educator Fellow.
Yes.
Which is awesome.
Got to go to DC for a year and give advice to our government, both the executive and legislative branch, about science education.
Yep.
They didn't pay terribly a lot of attention to me, but it was a chance to see government up close and personal.
Walking up there, it's like, I can help us teach our children science. And they're like, listen, we have some wars to fight. And so now, yeah, let's do this. The nature of learning and just the importance of this knowing how to teach and teach others how to teach well to the youth, to get them to care more about science and to care more about the world around them in that sense. And also, there's all these different learning styles, so that complicates things a lot.
I have some choice things to say about learning styles, but we can save that for a little bit.
I want to hear them.
So there's little to no evidence that there are particular styles that you learn best at. So like, there are some things that are taught better one way or another. So if I want to teach like how forces interact to make a building able to stand up, if I didn't draw you pictures of the building and show you lines and do that in a visual way, that'd be a lot harder. On the other hand, if I'm teaching about how sound works in waves and I don't use auditory things, I'm wasting an opportunity. So different topics can be taught different ways, in some ways better than others. But we also have preferences of like the ways we like to learn.
Yeah.
So some of us like to read, and some of us like to listen, and some of us like to see people dance their PhDs, which is a fantastic set of videos you should see. Yeah. But it turns out that there's been tons of research with thousands and thousands of students. And it turns out that is largely unimportant. Like what a student thinks is their preferred learning style, what some tests that they have taken that says that they learn best in a visual way, or there's just little evidence that they actually do learn better that way. Now, it is true that we are happier when we have our preferences being fulfilled. So if we like to be taught in a visual way and we're being taught in a visual way, we'll certainly be happier and learn more from that. But it doesn't necessarily mean we will learn more. The teacher should, rather than trying to like pick the learning styles of their students, they should be picking the method of instruction that best teaches the material.
Exactly.
And so it's the material that needs to be pegged, and then students need to learn how to interpret all the different kinds. So everything from how to look at graphs and understand things visually, to how to listen to a story and how to use a story to help them remember information better. And all the ways to like how to like handle equipment, and so how that the interaction with the actual physical world, helps you learn things. So all of those need to be put in together, and they need to be based on what's the most useful thing to teach that particular topic. And now that I've gone into this, you will get thousands of comments saying that I don't have any idea what I'm talking about in terms of learning styles, because every kid for about the last 10 years has been tested on it, but there is tremendous, the body of research is quite large.
I actually agree a lot with what you're saying, especially as someone that sits across from these diverse scientists and entrepreneurs working on all these different styles of projects. And then as I actively listen to them and paraphrase what they say to make it relatable, I'm doing exactly what you just said, which is if they're explaining something a certain way, then they're doing it because they already know that that is a way that relates more with the general audience. And so, like you said, you're making a building. You've got to show how the building stands up visually. If you're learning about sound, it helps a lot to actually hear the sound through your senses. It's like different senses get activated when it doesn't even make sense to try and explain. Yeah.
Alan,
Yes,
I'm
Ron.
sorry. Is the lavalier transmitter next to somebody's cell phone?
Oh, interesting.
It is actually.
Yeah,
Did it just buzz through?
Thank you. No, it does interfere with the
Oh,
signal.
that's a good call. We can put it down here.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
No worries. That's a good catch, Ron.
Yeah.
What? And just out of curiosity, do you know what occurs? Is it a?
If he's getting text or if the phone is ringing and vibrating, it's just you can hear the.
So it wasn't ringing or vibrating. I mean, it wasn't actually vibrating. It might
Maybe you got it.
transmission.
Yeah, it could be just
The proximity of the two can create static?
Yes.
That's so interesting. Didn't know that. That's good to know for future.
Sorry if I just screwed up our audio.
Nah, you're good.
Do you have any idea how much money that just cost us?
Yeah. So much time.
Our corporate sponsors are going to be pissed.
That was actually a good learning. It's funny, we're talking about learning, and then we have a cell phone next to an actual receiver for the transmitter for audio. So that's interesting how there's interference between those two. Okay, so back at so the way that you teach material, depending on the material, is more important because you're trying to get it to the general masses than it is to personalize to every single student.
Well, so I don't want to get that. I don't want to have that quite strong a generalization. I will say that some things personalize very well to each individual student, and other things don't. So an example of this is that one of the strongest things you can get a student to learn, or help a student learn something, is to have them be invested in the answer. And so there's been a lot of interesting research on this front, which is that so if you show a student a demonstration, even a very dramatic demonstration, like you could show them that two objects of different masses, and you can let them fall to the ground, and you can set it up with electromagnets that release them at exactly the same time, and then have high-speed cameras so that they can see it in class, them hit at the same time, and then ask them a few weeks later which mass will hit the ground first. Some of those students will say the heavy one will hit the ground first, even though they've seen in class with the high-speed camera the two objects hit at the same time. And you might say, so like, how can that be? Like, why would they, like, you know, they just saw this great demonstration. Well, it turns out that most of the time kids are really passive in class. Even though you've been a lot of work to make this complicated demonstration, the students just like sitting back on, yeah, I've heard of that before. But then when you ask them on the test, what happened? They'll say, I saw the heavy one. The heavy one will hit first. And how do you know? And you ask that in the question, they'll say, because I saw that in class a couple of weeks ago, even though they saw exactly not that. And so having students become invested in the process is very important. And one of those ways you can do that is you can have students make predictions. Ask them ahead of time, what do you think is going to happen? Make them write it down. Make them send it to the teacher some way.
Okay.
And then if you do that, then students will get a better result. And because we've really actually personalized this experience for that student. They are involved, they have skin in the game.
Yeah. Nassim Taleb, skin in the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important for everybody, including students. And then you can get even more skin in the game later on, is after they have some experience with some of the things you're trying to investigate, you ask the students, what experiment would you like to see next? What do you think is going to happen? Like, come up with your own idea for something to do. And in a big lecture class of 75 or 100 students, that's tough to do their ideas, but in a high school classroom or middle school classroom with 30 kids in it, you can have their suggestions and then try those things out and see what they learn from them. And that really gets kids involved. And then when you're involved, then you want to learn and you want to understand. And that's incredibly personalized. That's a lot more personalized than saying, I'm just going to do this visually for the visual students and auditorially for the auditorials.
Oh, yeah.
For the audio-based students. No, it's like, I'm curious what will happen when you do this, and then you do that and find out what happens.
Ooh, I'm liking where you're going right now. There's these almost these best principles for getting students invested into the knowledge that they're learning.
Right.
And so one of the ways you said was to have them make a hypothesis on what's going to happen. That gets them invested into the outcome. They're trying to be like, did I guess that right? Or was I wrong? Why was I wrong? Maybe another way is, one of my favorite ways of teaching kids about gravity is the trampoline with the weights. I love that educational piece. It was so fascinating because the trampoline's the fabric of space-time, and then the larger piece of mass was in the middle as the star, and then they'd throw the marbles around as the planets orbiting. And I just thought that was such a good example. So then if the students are the ones that also actually get their hands on the practice, that can help a lot as well. Right.
So in addition to just like showing them what happens with it, you'll say to a student, well, let's say I have another large mass in the middle, and so you have sort of two depressions in the fabric. And you can ask the students to try to guess what will happen now. And so they work that for a while so they have some feeling for the system, how it's a model, what its limitations are as a model, a little bit, and then they can say, now, what questions do you have about how this will work? And how do you think this is connected to what actually happens? And then students will say, oh, I wonder what happens if there are three. That's pretty straightforward. And then someone will say, but what if they're like two right on top of each other? How is that different than two separated? And then you'll say, I don't know. The answer to every question is an experiment. Let's try it and see what happens.
Zeke, what other best practices do you pass along to other teachers that are, especially you work with a lot of teachers that are just starting to teach, right?
Right. So the hardest thing for new teachers, actually it's hard for all of us, not just new teachers, is when we learn
especially when there's like 40 kids packed into a classroom.
Well, there are definitely some principals and some school board members that I'd like to have long conversations with about why you've set things up this way. But in any case, we can't control that part. Or at least I can't control that part. But one of the hard parts for teachers is, or for any of us, is understanding what it takes to make sense of some phenomenon. So you can't just tell people that it works this way. Like, that doesn't convince people. It doesn't change the way they see the world, the sort of mental models we already have in our head about what's happening. And so you have to figure out, what are all the different ideas that you'd have to be convinced about before you could even begin to start putting all the ideas together to have a new mental model about how the world works. And so one of the things we spend a lot of time working with new teachers is having them look at some particular topic. Like maybe they want to teach students about air pressure, for example. What do you need to know to be able to sort out the ideas of air pressure? Well, you need to know that inside this invisible stuff here, there's stuff actually there.
There's actually little atoms of nitrogen and oxygen.
Exactly, yeah. There's actually little bits of things here. You have to convince them that they're moving around. You have to convince them that they move around faster when they're hotter and less fast when they're cooler. That when they collide with things, they can push on them, and that pushing is what we call pressure. Like they're all, and you need, to really teach it well, you have to sit down with all these different things that you have to teach, and you have to figure out, then what's an activity, what's a way to convince the skeptical child?
Yeah.
And if they have any sense, they'll be skeptical because they learn lots of things in school that aren't true. So they should definitely be skeptical. How you convince a child about each one of these ideas, and then figuring out what order to do these activities in can be challenging as well. In some ways, only through experience can you achieve enlightenment. Can you figure it out? You have to try different things. But you put these activities together then so that the students have this experience that this is the way the world works. You don't just have to trust me. And then you help them make sense of all these ideas and build this new mental model. And that's a multi-step process. You have to figure out all these little bits and put them together.
I really enjoy the way that you're explaining. It's like the mind is this like tabula rasa, this blank state.
Oh, it's worse than that. It's full of wrong things.
It's full of wrong things.
Like the first step you have to do is convince people that. Actually, I say it's full of wrong things. It's not true. It's actually full of lots of ideas, most of which are true.
Yeah.
But some of them are not true. Like that's why science has to come about. We didn't come into the world, and I mean our ancestors didn't come into the world already knowing how the world worked. They were full of what worked well at the time for the amount of knowledge that they needed to have at that moment. But as we get more sophisticated and have more sophisticated systems, then we discover that some of the things, the ways we think the world works, aren't true. They don't pass our mental models. And so we're like, whoa, that didn't happen the way I expected. I need to figure out what's really happening. And that's something that we want our students to do as well, because then that's what will change their mental model so that then they can reshape it to a new idea. And that's why it's so hard. That's why you can't just, because they don't come in tabula rasa. If they came in not knowing anything, you could just tell them this is the way it works.
Yeah, they come in with incorrect interpretations, which makes it more difficult to teach as well. So it's almost as though this is something that we speak about quite a bit on the show, is this notion that when a child's birthed into the world, that it is then the responsibility of the parent and of the community, of the teachers, of the social fabric in general, to help that child gain some sort of a objective understanding of the world that they live in, and then also to have a path of actualization to bring value to the world and to find meaning and all this kind of stuff. And so the idea of all these different ways of helping mold that child's mind through these strategies that have been practiced for long periods of time is crucial. Like you described, the child must have an example of how to learn about pressure and how to learn there's actually things here. And then the child must learn about how, well, if I tell you that the water has a certain molecular composition, or that this glass was made 5,000, or the glasses were made 5,000 years ago, there have got to be ways for the child to better understand that through pictures, maybe of very old ancient photos, maybe of the composition of water through actual diagrams of H2O and et cetera. So and then how do they get to play with it, to break it down themselves? Maybe they make a pottery themselves of a glass.
Well, so certainly, I mean, for water's if a student's not doing electrolysis in class and discovering that you can break down water with electricity into hydrogen and oxygen, and then in one test tube you'll get twice as much hydrogen as you get oxygen in the other tube, and then if you combine them together you make an ear-splitting explosion, but you get drops of water afterwards. Like, that stuff, like, that's an experience that will teach you a topic that, I mean, admittedly almost all of us know that water is H2O, but it's taken many of us you know, we had to get taught this over and over and over again before we understood and believed it was true. We could have been, if we had our students do the science that the scientists actually did, or simplified versions of it, or ones where they don't have to go down all the wrong paths that didn't work out very well, so that they can have a chance to do some of these activities, and they can learn a lot out of it, and they both learn something about the nature of science, and it's more memorable and it'll stay with them.
Okay, how about we ask you, what are some of the other best practices that you've learned? You've been teaching us about some so far. They're super interesting. What are ones that really resonate with teachers and or students?
Well, students really like stories as well. And so that leads some people to, when they want to teach science, to teach it as this historical document. And I did get a degree in the history of science, and so it's super interesting to me. The problem is that most of the historical stories are kind of not true. Like we oversimplify them so that people have a tough time really like understanding that science like goes the wrong way a lot, and then has to backtrack when they discover that no, that idea isn't actually enough. And we teach science always being very linear, where multiple paths are actually happening all at the same time, and one of them will be resolved. But students can make their own sort of stories about not the history of science, but the particular problem that they're interested in. You can teach through having students do projects, so project-based science works great, but also just some sort of storyline. So for example, many years ago when I was teaching in New Orleans, there was New Orleans has streetcars and an intersection, and it turns out that students who were just learning to drive at the same time they were taking my physics class would discover that they would get caught in this intersection all the time, and it was very scary because the streetcars had the right of way and they'd come up very close to them. And try to frighten them off the tracks, and that would make them jump across the street, and sometimes they'd get into car accidents. It's terrible. And so one of my students had the hypothesis, the idea that the yellow light was the wrong length of time. So we were teaching about accelerations, we were teaching about braking, how fast can you safely brake, what's the speed limit of the street, and we could then sit down and we could measure the street. We measured the size of the intersection, how fast cars were typically going, what the actual speed limit was, how fast cars could stop. And we did some of our own research on that, but we also were happy to use Car and Driver, which lists the best braking speed. It used to list, I don't know if they still do, but it used to list like the best braking speed of all the production cars at the time. And then students had a problem that they wanted to solve. Were interested in getting the data right for it, and they essentially had a story, because they could each one made up their own story of like when they were going through that intersection and how dangerous or scary it was, and how maybe we could make that just a little bit better. And so for the first time, students were super interested in like understanding acceleration right, and that's fantastic when that happens. They take on the project for themselves.
Yeah. There's these story moments for kids when they realize that their story in everyday life has to do with science and math. And I remember hearing from people for the last couple of years, I'm not good at math. And then one of my first examples is, well, you know, when you're walking across the street and the light's about to turn, you know, you're calculating 6, 5, 4, sure, and you're in the process of starting to cross the street, you then are running a complicated math problem in your head. You're like, okay, I can either stay back or I can pick up speed by about 3 miles an hour so that I can cross the street before the signal ends so that the cars can go. And they're like, oh, that's math. And I'm like, yeah, that's math. And you're doing it without even knowing that you're doing it. And even either more simple things like even tips, 10%, move the decimal, you're like, oh, that makes sense, etc. So,
although I hope you're doing more than 10%.
Yeah. 10, move the decimal, times 2. All
right,
and then there's the 20. There's your 20. Yeah. Okay, so then, okay, let's ask about this, because I think you'll have a good perspective on this. What is the ideal environment for a teacher and kids? Teachers are, first of all, they're just very underloved and underappreciated in today's world, but also we need to have, you know, really strong teachers in those positions. If teachers are paid more and we review them more often, and then people would be more excited to be teachers, etc., we could end up having a really stronger system. Okay, now what is this ideal environment, and also where do kind of like where does the philosophy of teaching come into play here? We've all kind of been talking about it a little bit, but we probably shouldn't be a teacher to 40 kids. It should probably be a teacher to maybe 20 kids. And then should they be specializing in just science and teaching just science for 20 years, or should they be a little more broad? Give us your thoughts.
So class sizes should definitely be smaller. And teachers should have the resources so that they have time to prepare their lessons. They should have the physical resources to be able to do lab experiments in class, and to do the experiments in class, and the materials, so that group sizes can be sufficiently small that everyone can get their hands on the equipment. Watching someone else do science isn't a spectator sport. You do it yourself, at least as much as possible. Some things might be a little too dangerous. We wouldn't want every kid maybe blowing up the hydrogen balloon, but we want to have enough materials to go around so that each lab group can do the experiments. And then we actually don't want it so small, you actually don't really want kids by themselves, because for many kids, talking it out with someone else helps them make the connections that they're looking for. As most of us know, that working on teams helps us figure things out better than usually. There are some people for whom by themselves is best, but for most of us, working with someone else helps us figure out what we're really thinking and tests us and doesn't let us keep our dumb assumptions. They'll say things like, that doesn't make any sense, I don't know what you're talking about. So those are the things that so those are all the things that teachers need. I taught history as well as science, and I've taught a little bit of math as well, and I ended up teaching a lot of science disciplines. But I don't necessarily think that that's the best path. For a person, teaching science is a different discipline because of all the lab experiences that I think students should have, and that takes a lot of time to learn. So I would say that teaching science, I don't want to add any extra burdens on teachers besides having to teach science.
Okay, so class size smaller, also help with these best practices, get them out into the world. Now, okay, I want to ask you a question about the, what would be an ideal, if we were to create a volume 1 of knowledge, let's say. If we were to create volume 1 of knowledge, what would be written in this book? And what year could a child learn, what year could a parent start teaching their child this volume 1 of knowledge?
Well, I mean, sort of a complicated question. I'll say that, the process skills are what you would want to start with the youngest kids. Learning how to observe the world, learning how to ask questions of it and do experiments to see what actually turns out, and learning to trust what you learned by experiment is a way of thinking about the world, like trusting your own senses, that they aren't trying. They do sometimes lie to you, but they aren't trying to lie to you. I think that those are all the places that you would start with younger kids. And then younger kids are pretty smart. They can actually handle quite a lot. I wouldn't start with calculus in 4th grade, but students can start doing, we have intuitive number sense. Students can start learning about numbers. One of our groups, the group I work with only works with the middle and high school teachers, but we have another group at the Exploratorium called the Institute for Inquiry that works with elementary school teachers. They have activities that start with like figuring out what causes shadows. Ooh. And what happens if you have multiple light sources or an extended light source, or instead of like point sources of light, like a fluorescent tube.
We should come teach that at the studio. Look it
up. Like lighting in a studio is a part of that kind of challenge. For example, you have 6 lights in a big skylight in here. Yeah. You have multiple lights because you could just say, well, why have a bunch of lights? Why not have just 1 or 2 bright lights? And of course, it has to do with shadows. And as we get older, you understand that, especially when you get in the business. But when I first started doing some, I was, a teacher. I was going to videotape my classroom. And so I just got a big light on top of my my camera, and I spent a couple weeks taking terrible videos because I didn't understand that would cast harsh shadows on everything that I would do. Yeah. But an elementary school student not only can figure that out with some instruction, some activities set up for them, they can become really sophisticated in understanding like where shadows come from and why some shadows are darker than other shadows, and even why an eclipse, like some parts see part of the sun and some parts see none of the sun in the eclipse. Like that's perfectly within their abilities.
Okay, so let's say that we're starting to teach a child about perception and analyzing their environment and then running tests and then being able to secure that as knowledge or not as knowledge because they haven't tested it enough, etc. Okay, so that's the perception layer. Now here would be a question to ask you that I think you'll find interesting. Something that I've started to say a lot on this show is the idea of objective truth being a very important foundational layer for civilization. If we lack objective truth, we can get into a very like postmodernist sort of everybody disagrees on everything sort of understanding of things, and that's not good. We need some sort of objective truth. So, for example, we were talking about the molecular composition of water, or maybe we're talking about gravity at the surface of the Earth, or maybe we're talking about the Earth being a sphere or that it orbits the star. So here are these, or maybe your heart that beats 100,000 times-ish per day that keeps you alive. Okay, so we just listed a couple of these objective truths. Now, would you say that it's important to get these kind of fundamental pillars of truth to young children?
Sure, and I think they'll be more meaningful for them if they get them through experience.
Yes.
So like it's, if you want to, figuring out how many times your heart beats per day is an interesting, is a way to teach multiplication because it's a hard addition problem. 3,600 seconds per hour makes that challenging to try to actually start counting them up. That way, you want multiplication then.
Yeah.
But you can, a student, like it's better to have them sort of figure out how many times their heart beats in a minute and then multiplying it out. Like that's not a hard, rather than me telling them that. I mean, the same thing with that the Earth is round. I mean, it is objectively round. I think the evidence very strongly points to that.
But if they can strap on like VR and look from the International Space Station down at Earth, maybe something like that could be.
That might help, although figuring out like why it seems flat, but people thousands of years ago knew that it was round. Like that is helping students like have that same revelatory moment, I think is really worth it rather than trying to beat into someone's head that the Earth is round. Because for fun, and this is I work for the Exploratorium doing physics shows. I thought that in the age of YouTube, no one would want to see physics shows anymore. But it turns out that
a lot of people want physics shows. Oh yeah, there's a whole channel called Minute Physics that does really well on YouTube.
But here's the interesting bit about Minute Physics does terribly well, and so I thought that people who would be showing physics demonstrations on YouTube would kill the local physics show business. Like who would come and watch someone do a physics show?
Because the experience design right there in front of your eyes.
Yeah. So people still fill the halls to go and see physics shows, even though they can see them better and more close up on YouTube.
In their boxers.
Exactly. In a hot tub. There are times and places to really do physics, and but because we actually live in a world where it's so easy to manipulate images, I think they actually believe them less now. I think YouTube's actually has created an even stronger desire for hands-on knowledge.
Yes.
And places like science museums, like the Exploratorium, where you have a chance to try out and learn knowledge through experience, I think it's really become an even more important place, because whereas VR, they could just as easily show you through the goggles that the world really is flat with giant holes scattered among it, and No. So, but I mean, you could do it, and you could show whatever you'd like through it. And so that, I think, I mean, at first we just believe everything we see, but as we become more mature, we start to wonder whether we can believe anything that we see. And so I think that there's a lot of interest for people to going back to like, I need to have it directly experienced through my own senses, through my hands, eyes, and ears.
I like how you called it the revelatory experience, that it needs to be hands-on experience revealed to you, that even though a couple, even 100 years ago, it was like, oh, are we going to sail off of the side of the earth?
No one has believed that, at least in the West, since about 500 BC. Like no one thought Columbus was going to sail off the end of the debate was how big the Earth would be. You knew you were going to pray. Yeah, like not that the Earth was flat, but how big the Earth was. And he was wrong too. Like if he hadn't run into North America, he would have starved to death, which arguably might have been okay. But
could the rest of the planet just be an ocean?
Right.
And it's just one piece
He
of
didn't
land.
think it could be. He thought it couldn't be. And so then he thought that people had calculated the Earth as being too large, that the Earth was actually much smaller.
Do you think there are undiscovered islands?
No.
You think we've discovered everything?
No. We don't know anything about the bottom of the ocean.
Bottom of the ocean, yeah.
We know far more about Mars than we know about the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah. It's like the Mariana Trench is like 37,000 feet deep or something like that. It's like crazy deep.
We have an exhibit at the Exploratorium. It is not a physics exhibit, despite the fact I teach physics, but it is my favorite exhibit in the building. It's a plate that we keep under the bay, under the water. And it stays under the water for several weeks, and then it's brought up and put into a sealed cylinder. And we have some cameras that look at it, and you can zoom the cameras around so you can look closely at this plate. And the plate is full of monsters and things that you've never seen before. Even though I look at it every day and I work there 4 years, I still see on every plate something new that I've never seen before. And this plate just lives for several weeks just under the Exploratorium in the water.
Wow.
And it's full of things that are completely, I mean, I'm not a marine biologist, maybe it's not completely new to marine biology, but most of us walk around having no idea what's happening just under the surface of the water.
Totally. What are some of the things that you discovered on the plate?
So first off, I've seen barnacles before. I've gone sailing, but I've always seen barnacles all closed up because they're out of the water. It turns out that they open up and have giant feather-like appendages that go out that look like, there's actually no horror monsters that look as nasty as the feathery appendage that's like grabbing things out of the water and trying to pull it into this horrible mouth-like device. I've seen 2 shrimp tear each other's arms off.
Whoa.
I mean, fighting over territory, food, I wasn't sure. Once a little tiny crab got in there and it was just like running rampage over everything else. Like it's...
Okay, so but the plate, you only see it once you take it out.
Right.
Okay, and then once you take it out, then how do you...
So it's got a little cylinder, so it like continues to circulate water in it. So so the plate is like it's still under the water, except it's now in a little cylinder like this.
But you were capturing the video of what was
so
going on in... Oh, you were capturing the video of what was going on throughout the period of time.
No, just for this like week that we've taken it out of the water, and then we'll put it back in again.
Okay, and capture it for that week though, or no?
No, it's. I'm sorry. I've done a terrible job of explaining. So like we have a whole series. There are like 6 or 7 of them that live under the bay, and we pull one up and put it into a special refrigerated box that flows water over it, but now inside the Exploratorium, so that people can look at the plate and it's more like a cylinder, I suppose, because it has water flowing over the top of it, so that the creatures in there, it's sort of like it's still under the water. And then we have some excellent cameras that can look in on so that you can really see up close to what's all the life that's happening there.
I like how we were talking about the insanity of the 95% of the ocean that remains unexplored. That's crazy. I remember seeing that video, I think it was off the coast of Japan, of that like massive octopus that came by, or it was a squid, one of the two.
It was a colossal squid.
Colossal squid, just
like they ran out of adjectives after a while.
Yeah, exactly. Colossal is excellent. But yeah, they came by, just massive, huge being. That's one of the two. I'd like to ask you this question, but one of the two for me, for the question of what animal would you choose to be? I like eagle, I like flying, and then I also like this octopus or squid, these massive underwater creatures, so I can go and explore down there. What about you?
I've always thought about becoming I actually didn't in the few seconds you've asked me, but now I've always been afraid of Humboldt squid. They're these squid that live out in the ocean and have recently started showing up off the California coast. They're about 6 feet long, and in addition to suckers, they also have giant hooks.
Ooh.
And they're smart enough to figure out like the hoses that divers need to stay alive, and they like take off divers' masks, knowing that then they can't see under the water. So
that's scary.
yeah, I think I think there's an excellent science fiction novel out there about how squid and octopi figure out that humans are destroying the ocean, have decided to take over the sea. And we don't get to go back into the ocean anymore until we clean up our act.
To clean up the act. They see the Pacific garbage patch and they're like, we're taking care of these human people.
I mean, we're just lucky that they have very different brains than ours and think quite differently than us, I presume. But they live relatively short lives. So octopi and squid, octopodes,
Octopi,
octopuses,
I think. Octopus.
We'll go with that. They live 4 and 5 years. So if they live.
Oh, that's short.
If they lived long lives like us and were social like us, they aren't very social. They live long lives and were very social.
Octopus really live short life?
They do. They have short lives.
Even the real big ones that you see?
I believe even giant octopi live short lives.
Oh, all right. I used to feel bad because, I like octopus, and but now I
feel less bad.
You shouldn't feel less bad. They're very smart.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's why now I don't really like. I feel bad because I eat them, because if they're a smart creature and just the whole living thing.
Urchins deserve it, but.
Okay, how about you give us another area or two that is super fascinating to you?
I'm really interested in the nature of perception. Like, how do we, the we that we think of is actually, a bunch of goo in the center of my head. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll include the spinal column a little bit with it as well. And
do you think the we is centralized to this nervous system?
Yeah.
It's located right here, and the we does not exist outside of this area right here.
So far, I have not found any evidence that I found compelling.
Okay.
I mean,
continue.
I will agree to the limitation of my knowledge.
Yeah, likewise, yeah. Okay, so perception.
But that are those limits on our perception. So, for example, I'm colorblind. And so I don't perceive colors the same way that other people do. And so I have to take sort of people's word for it, that there are other, that these two colors look different when they look the same to me. And I just wonder what other sort of limits of our perceptions mean that there are things that are around us that we aren't able to perceive.
But what Zeke's not telling you is that he can see an infrared.
Yes. You can too.
You can too.
You have infrared sensors all over your face. Like little, so you don't have lenses for them, so you don't have so pit vipers have essentially pinhole cameras for infrared. And we have, of course, lenses for visible light, but you actually have infrared sensors on your face. If you take something that's hot, like a candle flame, and you close your eyes and have someone else hold it in front of your face, you can know its general vicinity. You can put them blindfold, so you for sure can't see the light of it. You can feel the placement of it. You're not nearly as precisely as you can with vision, not even close to that. But you do have heat sensors on your face so that you can find. Like, it'd be bad to run into something that's hot.
Agree, or similarly to our skin though, where we take a candle and put it here, we can still sense it.
Sure. In fact, it's more. I'm pretty sure that your face actually has much better heat sensors than your hands. I was working with a glass blower a while ago, and he was fond of saying over and over when we were trying to do some glass work that hot glass looks exactly the same as cold glass. And so what he would do is he would pick up the hot glass with his pair of tongs and hold it in front of his face to see if it was cool, rather than like touching it with his hand first and burning his hand. He says, you don't want to.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
And he said, you can like
that's how you can tell. Yep. So, okay, so the limits of our perception, so you know David Eagleman's work as well? Yeah, so this is really interesting. We can augment our human senses in order to explore more of the world around us. Where do you stand in that augmentation? Like, what are your interests in it? You were just talking about it.
So what happened?
Ooh, our 15-minute timer. Thank you, Ron. Flip that up. All right, that's it. We have our graphic coming back.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah. I was thinking maybe you were going to pull up like the giant squid or like the Mariana Trench. We should get better at that though over time.
I'm just experimenting with other things this machine can do, and I messed up.
No, let's do that though for the future ones. That'll be cool to pull up the different graphics.
Yes,
and stuff.
yes.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Fix it in post.
Yeah. We're working on figuring out how to make the shows exceptional. Yeah, and right now they're okay.
We need to talk to the finance officer and try to find the budget to do that.
Find the budget. Yeah, exactly. We're working on it. Visit us on Patreon to help us with this. Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. Okay, so continue with senses and perception.
So a few years ago, I went to an event where a guy had put a bracelet, bracelet on his ankle. And at first, when we saw them, and then I was like, "Oh my God, I wonder what he did that he has to be under the house arrest anklet." But no. What he had done was he had put a magnetic field sensor, Hall effect probes, on it. So he had an electronic device that knew which direction was north, and then he had a very small vibrating thing on.
I've heard about this.
On his ankle, so that it would always be just very gently vibrating against his ankle. And he said that. At first, he detected, he felt the vibration, but after a while, that vibration had sort of faded away. I mean, he could refocus in on it, but he mostly just sort of knew what direction north was. And then when he was in a building that had big iron walls and things like that screwed up, finding magnetic north, he said he would feel disoriented, and it would take him a while to realize in what way he was feeling disoriented from it. And so I think that it's probably possible to add, since I think our brain is sufficiently plastic that we could probably add additional senses to our existence.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what ones we would want, because I feel like we're already electromagnetic is static electric field, or relatively static. And relatively static magnetic fields we have no senses for, and so I think it's amazing that we found them at all, that they're actually out there.
Yeah.
But I wonder what other things we could detect. I always imagine what would it be like to be a dog and to have this chemical sensor that's telling you so much more information about the room that I have nothing about.
Those slits on the nose just
pull in
so much smell. Yeah, exactly. What it would be like to be a dolphin, and what it would be like. Yeah, I want to feel those senses. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there soon. How we do it is very difficult, but we're slowly gonna get there. Zeke, okay, couple simulation questions for you on our way out. How about we ask you, as we become a more globalized world, and when we look at Earth from the moon, there's no borders. But when we talk about economic and political issues, we definitely talk about borders and stuff. How do we work together as a planet and progress and prosper?
Well, I think that I'm no expert, right? I know a lot about teaching. I don't know a lot about this.
That's why we pull people into these new domains of thought too.
So my guesses is that the hardest part of that is actually figuring out what the goals are. The things that I want the world, that I think would make the world a better place. I'm not sure everyone in the world would agree with me on that.
Free, abundant, sustainable energy. Probably everybody could agree on that, right?
Except some energy companies in Texas. Yes, I think people would like to have more of those things. But figuring out, you're always balancing one set of goals against another. So,
air for everyone to breathe. Okay,
as long as I get to pick who everyone is, I'm totally on board with that. Yes, I think that those sorts of things are. I was visiting I was on a work trip in India, and I was sort of stunned at one point by the use, like there are just so many two-stroke engines being used, and they just puff out such contaminants. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't people use four-stroke engines? Well, two-stroke engines are a lot more reliable, and they don't break down so much. And making repairs is very expensive and hard to do. Many of the people couldn't afford missing even a single day's work for the time to do that. The two-stroke engines are less fuel efficient, but fuel is relatively inexpensive compared to missing a day being out of work. And it's much more expensive to buy a four-stroke engine to start with. And so the people weren't making crazy choices, because the four-stroke engines were available for tuk-tuks. You can get them. Just most people had chosen two-stroke ones because it was the economic choice that made sense in the moment. And I think that that's not I would like to have governments be able to help fix that problem. Like governments could, wouldn't just say ban two-stroke engines and then say people have to starve because they can't afford the four-stroke ones, but maybe help make those cheaper so that people can have. But I think that, in fact, I think that's sort of what governments are supposed to do.
Help people
make decisions that benefit everyone. I think those are the things that we would like government to do. And of course, I have libertarian friends. I live in the Bay Area who think that government always screws that up, so we should have less government. I disagree. I think government is been able to really help a lot of problems.
Definitely. I agree with that. Without the first founding documentation of government, we would be in a much different place as a country. How about we, again, trying to stretch you into a different zone. What do you think is going on with technology exacerbating wealth inequality? Overall, the bottom line of people is coming up slowly over time, but we're experiencing quite the different socioeconomic stratification that's going on. What do you think we're going to do about that wealth inequality gap?
So I don't know. I mean, I personally believe that I think that technology is involved in that, but I don't really have any evidence to support this statement. Like, we tend to jump. Like, I think part of it is that we tend to jump on whatever works the best, and so all other things get pushed aside, and so then all the finances then coalesce into one group. So, like, Google makes tons of money from advertising. That's to the expense of all the local things that used to get the advertising money in the past. And so, like, local newspapers vanish because there isn't as much advertising revenue for the local, because people are saying, well, maybe if I advertise using Google AdWords, that will work better for me. I can't quote any studies to that effect at the moment, but it seems like that might be the case. And so I think that then the sort of this desire for the best, and because it's so easy to switch, to jump on whatever seems to be the best, gives us, or creates the situation that a lot of resources are going to be concentrated in those single entities. And in the past, we've worked something with like creating standards bodies so that lots of different people can compete in the same field. And maybe that's the sort of solution that we need to have.
We have blockchain coming up with decentralization and distributed systems.
Right.
Seems to be a good solution as well to centralization.
Yeah.
Okay, question about the cosmos. Do you think we're alone?
There's no evidence there's anyone else out there. However, I believe that there must be. The universe is quite large. It can't be this unlikely.
Do you think there are advanced civilizations roaming the cosmos?
Again, I think that I suspect, yes, the universe is quite large. I suspect they're probably not like us. Like,
yeah,
I think,
what do they look like to you?
I don't know. I think I would like I think that my own biases are like, you know, what life is like. You know, Star Trek used to say it's life, but not as we know it, except it always was. Like, I'm afraid we would like run across other life, but not even realize it was there because it's so outside of our perceptions of what it
even
should be.
Freaking animals and plants, even at times like we just walk by them and don't realize that they're still absorbing nutrients and oxygen and sunlight and growing.
Things that live much faster or much slower lives, things that are very, like have, say, distributed sort of thinking systems, those things might all be very different for us and we might not be able to recognize
We barely even realize how synchronized we are in our energies right now, sitting next to each other, engaging each other. But when you look underground at the root systems of trees and of mycelium and these types of plants, it's just fungi, it's just wow, how are they doing that? How are they communicating like that? Okay, do you think we're in a computer simulation?
I don't think we're in a computer simulation, but I've read back and forth different people trying to argue whether or not you'd be able to tell. And Ian Banks is one of my favorite writers, Ian Banks, who talks about that as well in his writing. I'm not sure that I would know one way or another.
Maybe the deja vus are a little hiccup in the programming of the Matrix. Could be. Okay.
Have you ever had Vujade?
Vujade?
So that's the inexplicable feeling that you've never seen something before when you know you should have.
Oh.
Like, I have that every so often too. Like, I will pick up, I'm reaching the point in my life where I like pick up a book, I know I've read this book before, and I start reading and I'm like, this should feel like I should have more feeling about what's happening in this book, and I'm like, no, I don't recognize this. Like, did I not really read this before? Like, I'm sure I have. It's on my bookshelf. It's got the pages earmarked from where I like read it previously.
I'm gonna let you keep that one there as your own.
Vujade.
Yeah, I won't
Vujade.
rain on anyone's parade. Good one though.
That's a good one, though.
Yeah, right.
Okay, last question, or maybe we can pair these together, possibly. What is the deepest emotion you've ever felt?
I mean, I've had students at various times over the years like suddenly get something.
Yeah.
And look in their face as they suddenly understand something. It's not just being happy. It's fulfilling, like everyone wants to move the ball forward. Everyone wants to feel like that they're making progress in the world, making the world better. That sensation of like, I don't always know if I'm succeeding, but in that moment, I have this feeling of, wow, that is really working. That feels really good.
Yeah. The mind being expanded to new dimensions of thought and realization.
I mean, when they, like, I know that they are seeing the world differently in that moment, and that arguably there's probably no way to return to the way it was before.
Yes.
And that is really, you know, that's literally mind expanding for them in a way that, you know, is really thrilling.
And then it helps advance, it moves the ball of civilization forward. How about, okay, last question. What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Well, besides my wife, I just sort of, I like to just lie down someplace where it's not too cold and stare up at the stars and see the Milky Way and just watch the stars and the planets go by, or us turn underneath them, if you will.
Yeah.
But it has this sensation of being both very far away and close at the same time. And you can't tell the difference. You can't.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, they're beyond your reach, but how much farther? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, and all of their light beaming down onto you, all those stars. Oh.
I mean, the thought that you know, it's the motion of charged particles, hundreds of trillions of miles away. Their motion is causing the motion of charged particles in your eye to move. And that's all that light is. Like, that's kind of disconcerting. and beautiful.
It's so cool. Yeah, that's a good one. That feeling is so ego dwarfing. It feels so great. Zeke, wow. What a pleasure.
This is great being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, this has been such a pleasure. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've learned so much about the nature of learning and about how to teach these complicated subjects to kids, make them fun, make them engaged, get them excited about it and expand their minds, these new areas of thought. And how important it is to help support our teachers. Help support our teachers. Yes. They need help. There's too many stories of teachers having to go and get their own supplies or having too many kids in the classroom. There's so many of these stories. Let's work together on figuring out how to make this better. And I think we can do that here in the US and across the world, and giving teachers the right tools that they need and giving the kids the right tools they need, especially things like computers now in today's digital age. Like, it's a crucial aspect of their learning. All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. If you had a good time, share this content. Let's get other people talking about this. Give us a comment below with your thoughts, and we'll feature you on our Instagram and our Twitter. Let us know if you want to join the team. It's simulationseries@gmail.com. Let us know. We have tons of awesome opportunities and internships waiting. Also, give us a subscribe if you want to gently press the subscribe button. If you want to smash it, let us know. Join the team, subscribe. And join us on Patreon. We need to sustain the space. We need to sustain our team. Join us. Let's expand. Let's get more people in the creative studio. Let's get us up to football stadiums. Let's do it together. And thanks for Ron Vargas, our producing partner. And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you soon.